and welcome to all the folks on Zoom, of which I've seen a very large amount already. So we are boldly going into hybrid events. My name is Renee Nicholson, and I am the director of WVU's Humanities Center. And tonight, the center is very pleased to present a reading with James Tate from his recently published memoir, Blind Man's Bluff. So 3 weeks into my position as the Humanities Center director, the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, became the law of the land. As someone who lives with the disabling effects of rheumatoid arthritis, I desperately wanted to include programming in the center that honored the lived experience of those in my community. Amid the challenges of the pandemic and my newness in the position, I was disappointed when 2020 passed without a significant event sponsored by the center around disability. Now, I would not often credit Twitter with helping me solve problems. And I'm not quite sure when JT and I started to follow each other on that app. Literary Twitter can be a great resource for writers looking to connect with others. And somewhere in my contacts, JT's overlapped. If you don't follow JT, let me just say that his presence is funny, engaging, and full of puns and jokes that relate to popular culture. In fact, I rarely met someone as adept with lyrics from 1980s pop songs or quotes from 1980s films. However, at some point in 2021, I also started seeing posts about a forthcoming memoir. As a devoted fan of creative nonfiction and a sometimes writer of it, the discussion of this book, Blind Man's Bluff, intrigued me. JT crafted a compelling voice on social media, and I would find that voice honed for the page as well. Blind Man's Bluff does, in fact, tell the story of JT's life as a legally blind man passing misguided. But to leave the story there would be incomplete. As soon as we put disability in front of memoir, we inherently shift our expectations of what the book should do, often reflecting a societal desire for the lived experience to conform to a stereotype of what we think it should be. A plucky, resilient, inspirational, speaking for the community type book, instead of a single person's experience. In publishing his memoir, JT often upends this expectation. And while he includes a frank accounting of his struggles with blindness, it's part of a bigger story, including his interest in pop culture, about his romantic relationships and deep friendships, in his striving to be a writer, and of course, the inevitable ups and downs of being a Mountaineer fan. In The Art of Memoir, Mary Carr asks the questions, what would you write if you weren't afraid? I've thought about this question often while reading Blind Man's Bluff. At its core, it's a book about how we make our way in the world, and in some ways, a classic coming-of-age story. JT shows us how to craft the compelling voice to tell the story of our lives in all facets. And in many places, it's also a funny book. Anyone who has tried to write humor will know what a skill it is to create a voice that embraces wit and humor and gets away with it. It's one of the hardest things to do well, and in this way, JT's talent is enviable. He is unafraid to make us laugh, even as he takes us through events intense and heartbreaking. I must admit, it is also a specific pleasure to bring back a WVU alumnus of the Master of Arts in English. In Blind Man's Bluff, I encountered people and places familiar to me in that specific way that college campuses evoke. JT is also a West Virginia native from Charleston and now lives in North Carolina. JT's first book, Academy Gothic, won the Nelson Literary Prize for her first novel, and he serves as the fiction editor for Monkey Bicycle and contributing editor for Literary Hub, writing a monthly audiobooks column. We are so fortunate to have this writer with us tonight, And so I ask you to please welcome back to this campus, James Tate.
Hitting, yes, I'm going to take this all hopefully safely. This was vaccinated. It's just the one. Anyway, hopefully I'm too nervous to cry. Thank you, Renee, for that introduction, and thank you for bringing me here for this amazing event. This is only the second in-person event I've been able to do for Blind Man's Bluff, and it couldn't be more special to be back here. Hopefully I'll get started and be past the speed bumps of potential tears. I was at WVU for the Master of Arts program in English with a concentration in creative writing, just a touch before the MFA came along, and they were not wonderful years at WVU for reasons that did not have anything to do with WVU. It was the place I was in my life and emotionally at the time, and I'll be sure and read from that section a little bit for you all. So it's particularly special to be back here. 21 years I've not been back here. 21 years. Been back one time with my best friend from high school to watch the Mountaineers play Miami in what you can all guess what was a loss. The Miami Hurricanes, of course. And so I'm gonna talk during and around the sections I read. I'm gonna gladly answer any questions you all might have afterward, and I'll save plenty of time. But thank you all for coming out. I know it's particularly odd endeavor as we all venture back into in-person events. And again, it's just such a pleasure to be in this space on this campus back in my home state, which I've lived out of West Virginia for 21 years, and it's never ceased to feel more like home than everywhere else I've lived. And so thank you for having me back home. And so what I do, I do not have a book in front of me. I actually have an audio, digital version of my book in my trusty book player. So I'll look down and focus, but I'm not trying to pretend to read as I did for many years. And that's the crux of the book, is coming to terms with vision loss, but more so coming to a place of self-acceptance with identifying as blind. And I will be catching up to my voice that I hear in my ears, or the digital voice, and translating that into my throat voice. That's how I do. It's what my blind writer friend Leona Godin calls the Cyrano method of reading out loud. And so I am going to start with the prologue, so the very, very beginning, because I think it's always good to give as much context as possible. And so we're starting from the very beginning of the book, and then I'll skip around. I don't think it'll need a lot of explanation as we go, but this is the prologue. It's full dark when we reach Nashville in December. Mom reads me the names of stores and restaurants as she drives, trying her best to feign excitement. Looks like you've got an Olive Garden, she says. The jewel of my new neighborhood is a mall with a J.C. a Baptist church, and a bookstore that only sells remainder books. Even if I want to leave the apartment, the lack of sidewalks means navigating around a 4-lane highway. Never leaving the apartment sounds like a better idea. I call my wife, Meredith, to say we're close. She's making mulled wine with a bottle of our wedding Cabernet. Shouldn't we save that for a special occasion? I ask. You moving here isn't a special occasion? Shortly after accepting my marriage proposal, Meredith took an editing job that paid twice what I earned as an adjunct instructor of composition. We married in September and lived apart while I taught one final semester in North Carolina. I don't really like mulled wine, I say. Does your mom? I don't think so, I say, not bothering to check with her. My wife is all smiles when she answers the door. She hugs her mother-in-law while I carry boxes to the corner of the living room. I used to envy Meredith's outgoing personality. In light of recent events, I no longer trust her good moods. I can't believe we got married, my wife told me one night in early November, 2 months after we were married. What? She repeated what she had said. What are you talking about? Where is this coming from? She had trouble explaining. I hung up on her. Moments later, unsatisfied by the fecklessness of hanging up on a cordless phone, I called her back. What are you going to do when you get here? She asked. What do you mean? I had no clue where this conversation was coming from. Recently, our calls had been a little strained. We started to miss a day here and there. I blamed my frustration with how little progress I had made on the new novel. After every publisher to whom my agent sent my first novel had passed, my confidence in my writing wasn't at an all-time high. When we met in graduate school, Meredith's and my shared passion for writing had felt like a belief in the same God. Despite this compatibility, we rarely talked to each other about our work. Opening up to her about the wall I had hit seemed like a positive development. We never fixed anything, she said. On TV, Daryl Hammond was doing Bill Clinton on a Saturday Night Live rerun. I had muted it before calling, but left it on. The screen's flicker, the only light inside the black tunnel in which I unexpectedly found myself. I stared in the TV's direction, but it was too far, 5 feet away, for my eyes to discern more than movement. In an email the next day, Meredith apologized for calling after drinking most of the bottle of wine. Her apology didn't extend to the content of her words, only how bluntly she had said them. I will not, she elaborated days later, be complicit in your lie. I wasn't sure which word hurt more, lie or the B word, embedded so firmly in the next line. Blindness, your blindness. I will not help you hide your blindness from the world. She had never used that word around me before. If she knew how deeply it wounded me, would she have avoided it or moved it from quiver to bow years ago? It's better and worse than you might imagine. This is what I'd like to tell people who ask about my eyesight. What most people want to know is what I see when I look at them. And the short answer is this. I don't see what I look directly at. If I look up or to the side, I can see something. And this usually fends off further questions. This answer allows people to imagine, however erroneously, that my blind spots are smudges on the center of a mirror from which I can escape by looking elsewhere on the mirror. Eyes of omission weren't ones I hastened to correct. Instead of a smudge, picture a kaleidoscope. Orderless shapes fall against each other, microscopic organisms, a time-lapsed photo of a distant galaxy. Dull colors flicker and swirl, mustard yellow, pale green, magenta. That would drive me crazy, a friend once said when I described my blind spots for her. The most frequent compliment heard by people with a disability is, I could never do what you do. But everyone knows how to adapt. When it's cold outside, we put on a coat. When it rains, we grab an umbrella. A road ends, so we turn left, turn right, turn around. We adapt because it's all we can do and we cannot change our situation. I can still see out of the corners of my eyes, but here's the thing about peripheral vision. The quality of what you see isn't the same as what you see head on. Imagine a movie filmed with only extras, a meal cooked using nothing but herbs and a dash of salt, a sentence constructed only of metaphors. To see something in your peripheral vision with any acuity, it has to be quite large. On top of this, my periphery isn't unaffected by the blind spots. Looking directly into a mirror, I am not without a face. My kaleidoscopic clouds permit enough light to see pronounced contrasts like my eyes, nostrils, the crease where my lips meet. Of the many mundane abilities my remaining sight permits me, I am especially grateful for the ability to feign eye contact, if not always as convincingly as I would prefer. The closer someone's face and the better the lighting, the more easily I can keep track of the shadows between nose and forehead. A few inches from the mirror, I can gauge with some accuracy if all the coffee I consumed has stained my teeth, styled my hair, under the accuracy of a girl who told me when I was 20 that I kind of looked like Ben Affleck, which might or might not have compelled me to defend the actor's sometimes problematic career choices for the next 2 decades. Ex-husband of West Virginian J.T. When emails finally reverted back to phone calls after our argument, I asked the only question that seemed to matter. Should I move to Nashville? I had already given notice to my employer. For the past 4 months, I had slept on an air mattress and eaten off chipped plates that I planned to donate to Goodwill. Meredith's hesitation brought me an answer. She asked what I thought. I think your answer is more important than mine. Another pause. If you don't, this doesn't have much of a chance, does it? That isn't a yes. Then yes. It wasn't the sorry tone with which she uttered that word when I slid an engagement ring around her finger, but it was better than no. Meredith and I barely speak while we finish unloading the car. A Christmas cartoon blares on the TV. Meredith asks Mom if she wants to try the mulled wine. There's also pumpkin bread. I step into the bathroom with my coat still on. The bathroom has 2 doors, one leading to the hall and one to the bedroom. I lock both of them and bury my face in the bathtub. After a few minutes, I pull myself together. How apparent will it be that I've been crying? I study the blurry face in the mirror. If I stare at things long enough, I like to tell people they eventually come into focus. But this is not true. So that's the prologue, which is much later as a timeline in the book, and then I go chronologically from the loss of sight through that and beyond. And so I'm going to skip ahead to a very short passage that explains, in part, why I did not come to the progressive undergrad. And then, fear not, there is a much more optimistic and positive encounter that came in the year 2000, which I'll share with you a little bit later, that explains my positive encounters with disability services and assistive technology and so on. So this is jumping to the early spring, late winter of my senior year of high school. The director of disability services welcomed us into his office with a smile and a moist handshake. My parents scheduled the appointment to discuss my transition from high school to the giant state university I planned to attend in the fall. Less than a year had gone by since the permanent burnout of my optic nerves. I wasn't a big fan of the label legally blind, but that's what I was. The word disability, no less accurate, seemed even worse. You know, the man whose palm sweat I furtively wiped on my jeans searched for my name in the papers in front of him. Not finding it, he asked me what it was. I told him my name. You know, J.T., what's the best Christmas present you can give Mom and Dad for your first semester of college? I said I did not. The best gift that first semester is a report card of all C's. My parents and I stared blankly across the desk. I couldn't see their faces, but I could guess their expressions. As it happened, I had given them a similar present a couple of years ago, and they would have been grateful for the gift receipt. College is a hard adjustment, the director said. Once you have that first semester under your belt, then you can start thinking about B's, maybe even some A's. Which dorm should he stay in? Mom asked, changing the subject. To my parents, despite my underwhelming B average, I remained the prodigy from elementary school who had been declared gifted and moved ahead a grade. Our blind students stay in the downtown dorms. That way, they're just a short walk from us, plus most of his classes will be on this side of campus. I cringed at his use of the word. It felt like a slur. Strictly speaking, I wasn't blind. I had my peripheral vision, fuzzy though it was. My eye condition, that's what it was, a condition, not a disability. I had to put an end to my unremarkable driving career after 2 months. My pre-owned Mustang still awaiting sale in the Foodland parking lot. But I got around okay on foot. In New York City, most people didn't drive. I wasn't blind. I was a New Yorker. Such is the logic that inspires the right word, prompts me to continue trying to live the same life I was, the unremarkable life I was living before the vision loss. And as you might imagine, it does not go well. For a long time, it does not go well. But after college, I ended up going to West Virginia Wesleyan College down the road, and I did end up back in Morgantown in 1998. And this picks up there, and it's the start of the chapter titled Incredible Shrinking World, for reasons that are probably going to be obvious as I read along. Half an hour from the Pennsylvania border, Morgantown, West Virginia, is a city of 30,000, largely made up of the university you nearly attended as an undergraduate. You've been accepted into the master's program in English. It isn't creative writing, but neither is it moving back home with your parents. Your monthly budget is $476, the Social Security check you've received since turning 18. As part of the mental gymnastics required to convince yourself you are neither disabled nor blind, you regard the check as something between an inheritance and laundered money. The only apartments these checks can afford are efficiencies with hot plates and buzzing fluorescent lights reminiscent of bug zappers. Reluctantly, you accept your parents' offer to help with rent and sign the lease for a one-bedroom in a building that used to be, someone tells you in a few months, a psychiatric hospital. Arriving early for your first class, you find an empty classroom whose lights are off. A few days ago, in your practice walk to all your classes, a janitor confirmed you were in the right building. You feel the minute hand of your tactile watch. 20th century American literature should begin in 1 minute, and you remain the only person in the room. A short walk takes you to Stansbury Hall, home of the English department. The rooms with open doors seem like offices, and none of the sounds resemble a class in progress. The next day, you phone the professor, learn he moved the class to a building closer to his office. Didn't you see the note on the chalkboard? Says the gray-voiced man you don't realize is also the mayor of Morgantown. His tone is condescending, and you don't explain why you didn't see his note. You apologize and make an appointment to pick up the syllabus. Minutes later, deciding this isn't a man you wish to meet, you use the university's convenient automated vote registration system to drop the course from your schedule. You'll take an extra class in the spring, assuming you're still here. This is a little bit later in the chapter. Evenings you have class feel lonelier than the evenings you don't leave your apartment. Attempts to engage your classmates in conversations don't go well. A PhD student seated across the table in African American narratives, a class of 18 Caucasian graduate students taught by a white woman in her 30s, seems startled when you join in her pre-class banter with another student. The topic is cheese toast. You used to eat cheese toast for breakfast when you were a child, you tell her. It's good stuff, says the PhD student in a flat voice. The next week, she takes a chair several seats from where you are sitting. A kitchenette with a 3-burner stove and 3/4 size fridge lines the left wall of your apartment's smaller room. On the right sits the Packard Bell desktop you received the Christmas before your vision loss, which suits your only need. Typing papers on the identity politics of Prince's name change to an unpronounceable symbol. 10 pages not necessarily enhanced by quotations from critical theorists you've been studying. Sounds promising. Your professor comments on the idea, and you have never heard someone lie less convincingly. In the corner of the room with the kitchenette, balanced precariously on a TV tray, rests the microwave and toaster oven used for cooking 90% of your meals. Next to them sits the 2-top dining table that came with the apartment, which you use only occasionally, like dental floss and the vacuum, because eating at a table seems like something well-adjusted people do. Dark as it usually is when you wake up, you never bother opening the blinds. Night after night, you put off bedtime until 9 in the morning and wake at 6 p.m. in time to get ready for an evening class. Saturday nights, once the high watermark of the college week, are the days you most dread. Now, your week revolves around new episodes of professional wrestling, which air on Monday nights. The only shows on TV all weekend are reruns of Walker, Texas Ranger and Tasha by an Angel. Sometimes you draw a bubble bath with dishwashing liquid. Sean Garabedian's open house party turned up loud on the clock radio at the back of the toilet. Students at your university have a reputation for rowdy behavior. Burning sofas in the street to commemorate football victories, sometimes losses. West Virginia University is perennially ranked among Playboy magazine's top party schools in America. A superlative your quiet apartment does its best to contradict. I see we just recently reclaimed that mantle. Perhaps it's because the Mountaineers always come up short in big games. Perhaps because you've come to equate prosperity with making it out of your home state. You rarely check the football or basketball scores. Even the school's best-known alum, Jerry West, writes in his memoir about a lifelong sense of inferiority, stemming from a humble childhood in the rural hamlet where your grandmother grew up. Despite a career so successful, his silhouette still serves as the NBA logo. He remains haunted by 8 defeats in the NBA Finals. And the last second missed shot that would have delivered West Virginia its only championship. A little bit later, same chapter. And this is the happy bookend resolution to my negative experience with disability services in 1993. This is 2000, a new regime, although I suspect many of the other folks working in 1993 would have also been extremely helpful, unlike the dean of low expectations with whom I unfortunately spoke. Worries about where you'll be next year grow by the day. You also fear that your modest strides toward independence won't travel with you to the new town. Your Spartan diet of eggs, cereal, and canned soup isn't a menu you'd like to continue deep into your 20s, but for nearly a year, you've obtained these groceries without assistance. Armed only with directions you received over the phone, you found a place to get your hair cut, even if the student stylists at the beauty school haven't been the most consistent stewards of your sideburns of life apart. It's the terror of starting over, of once again having to rely on others that compels you to place the call to student disability services. It's a stab in the dark, but you're curious if technology has come any farther from where it was a few years ago. Your sophomore year of college, the director of the Learning Center led you to what seemed to be a storage closet. With a flourish of a magician's big reveal, the elderly, hunchbacked woman showed you a computer with several components attached, an ungainly setup a 1970s police chief might have referred to as the mainframe. She pressed a few buttons on the keyboard, clicked the mouse. HAL 9000 began to read in a slow, cadence-free voice, more primitive than the narrator of your talking dictionary. It took you a full minute to recognize the passage as content from your textbook for biological psychology. After futile hours trying to decipher the mispronounced names of neurotransmitters, you pleaded for the return of your human reader. Your prior interactions with this university's disability services didn't go well. The meeting with the director while you were in high school, the one who advised you to aim for a report card of straight C's, dissuaded you from coming here as an undergrad. More recently, at the start of this master's program, the office gave you a referral to a student reader for the handouts and books you couldn't obtain on cassette. The second week of the semester, the girl with whom they put you in touch phoned to say she was super stressed with her own classes and wouldn't be able to get your reading done that week, leaving you to read 12 pages of poems with your magnifier, word by word, letter by letter. In class, you had a lot more to say about the shorter ones. The Bible-thin pages of your critical theory compendium, the font not quite as large as the ingredients on a pack of chewing gum, went unread. 3 semesters later, you're counting doors in an unfamiliar building until you reach the office of the cheerful woman you've spoken to on the phone. Her detailed directions suggest she's used to students with less sight than you have. Technology's come a long way in the last few years, says the orange-haired woman who reminds you of a young Mrs. Garrett from the Facts of Life. Often, when someone knows about your disability before you meet, their warmth is layered with condescension, but not this woman. She leads you down the hall to a small computer lab, into a corner partitioned from the other computers. On the desktop boots, she hands you headphones and puts on a pair herself. Moments later, a digital voice says, JAWS for Windows is ready. The voice of JAWS, Job Access with Speech, reads you what is on the screen, including menus to any Windows-based program. The enunciation and vocal quality are more advanced than your talking dictionary and plot. Young Mrs. Garrett shows you how to adjust the speed, tone, and volume. She closes the window and opens a blank document in Microsoft Word, asks you to type something. The keys you press echo in your ear. She demonstrates how buttons on the number pad control what JAWS reads. Pretty easy, isn't it? Overwhelmed by everything you can suddenly do, you have to clear your throat before you answer. It is. She opens Internet Explorer. Bursts of color appear on the monitor. JAWS confirms the page is loaded, and the wonder you feel on visiting your first website rivals your first turn of a car's ignition. The new millennium is weeks old, and you are finally on the World Wide Web, if only the university's homepage. JAWS occasionally hiccups when a page loads, and sites with intricate graphics you'll discover don't seem to load in their entirety. Still, the last time you used a modem, the term internet hadn't been coined, and it took 8.5 hours for a friend to send you a compressed file containing a photo of a topless woman you're 90% certain was not Kathy Ireland. In the coming weeks, you'll devour pop culture trivia with the hunger of a shipwrecked sailor, conduct your own research for a paper for the first time since 11th grade, learn correct spelling of book titles and author names. It turns out your library does have, after all. Right now, the woman has another program she wants to show you. Paired with a scanner, this software translates printed pages into a digitized voice similar to the screen reader. You're currently on your 5th human reader in a year, and the uncertainty of who or how reliable the next one will be is a constant source of anxiety. The program's accuracy depends, among other factors, on how hard your hand presses the spine during scanning. Some serif fonts it seems to regard as obscure dialects of a dead language. Waiting up to a minute for 2 pages to scan makes scanning 2 out-of-print Irish novels for one of your classes a cumbersome process, but the reward of reading a book on your own far outweighs the hassle. That reading some of your books requires a 15-minute walk doesn't bother you in the least. It's nice to leave your apartment with a purpose, to have somewhere to go. Now, one of the things you may have noticed about the chapter is that not you, but me, as the you, second person point of view pops up in 3 chapters of this book. That's the second of 3. And in spite of what one reviewer wondered out loud, I did not get tired of myself. And first person point of view, and feel the need to move into second person. I find the second person to be very liberating in communicating those times in my life when I have felt least connected to a sense of self and most unmoored for a semblance of an idea about what my identity was. And perhaps not surprisingly, the third final chapter, using second person, is when I ventured into the world of online dating following a divorce. Spoiler alert, there's a divorce. Probably not giving much away. But I'm going to pick up with funnier material. Dating is nothing if not funny, especially online. This is pre-Tinder. I had to do it the old-fashioned way, eHarmony. So this will take us into the conclusion, just a few passages here. And this chapter is called Dating Tips for those still in denial about their disability. And the sections are numbered as though like a Cosmo article, I guess. 4, try a little harder to be alone. You don't have to be in a relationship. People throughout history have lived fruitful, wonderful lives without the romantic love of another person. This is what you tell yourself as you authorize eHarmony to debit your bank account $30 a month for the next 6 months. It's something to do, a way to extend your social circle. This is what you tell yourself as you complete your profile on the dating site whose TV ads taunt you with happy banter between married couples who met on the site. The only pictures you have of yourself are on a DVD of wedding photos, probably not the most appropriate for a dating profile. Jenny provides some group pictures from recent years and has you smile for a headshot. You're curious if you manage to look directly at the camera, but don't want to ask, don't want it to matter. Privately, your ex-wife instructed the wedding photographer to make sure you weren't looking off to the side. A dating profile is, if not exactly a lie, a carefully constructed press release. How should you say you've been legally blind since you were 16? You could try to hide it, as you've done for so many years, but passing for sighted, you're finally able to admit it hasn't worked out as you hoped it would. In trying so hard not to be different, you've been a poor attempt at ordinary. You type a few sentences about your disability in the Other Things About Me section. Hours later, you shorten what you wrote to a single sentence. Finally, you delete it altogether and click Save. 5. Typing is not dating. Within hours of completing your profile, multiple women initiate communication. This is encouraging for many reasons. Someone old enough to make the first move might be okay with a man who can't drive. The first round of communication consists of 5 icebreaker questions so innocuous as to be virtually useless. One, for example, asks, how often do you like to laugh? The multiple choice answers range from, I like a good joke from time to time, to, I crack myself up. You're a little surprised, perhaps disappointed in yourself at how much physical appearance factors into your early decisions. For your entire adult life, you've dreamed of the mythical love at first sight, of superficially picking a young lady out of a crowd, a bar, a bookstore. You've always had to go in reverse, getting to know someone before getting close enough for a thorough look at her face. It sounds romantic on paper, but let's face it, this method hasn't served you well. When you can't get a good look at someone, which is most people you're not kissing, your mind has filled in the blurs from the finite gallery of faces you encountered before you lost your sight. Now you can hold your magnifier against the computer screen and evaluate, inaccurately, but with less guessing than in person, physical beauty. If someone's profile pics bear little resemblance to her actual appearance, your letdown won't be any different from sighted people deceived by flattering lighting. Are you being too shallow to not respond to the woman in what is either a purple kimono or a sorceress costume who looks like your 8th grade journalism teacher? Perhaps, but how much compatibility can there be with a woman who has answered beneath last book I read, I don't really read? Her use of 2 exclamation points will unsettle you for some time. The same shallow impulse pushes you to respond to a nurse in her 20s named Soledad. Her primary profile pic seems to have been taken 2 hours after sunset from at least 20 yards away, but you've always had a thing for the former CNN anchor Soledad O'Brien. After trading lists of traits you're looking for in a partner, comes the exchange of open-ended questions. We try not to judge typos or poorly worded answers. The last thing you're looking for is another writer. But you can tell a lot from the words someone uses. So it adds use of te. For example, after sentences that don't strike you as attempts at humor, hint at a deep incompatibility. One can also tell a lot from what isn't said. One of your matches, for example, might infer something like denial from the omission of your blindness from your profile. She might also deduce from such an admission that it's not a big deal, or it doesn't have to be. For someone who's supposed to be good with words, you still can't find the right ones to tell strangers who you are and who you are not. 6, keep an open mind. Every woman with whom you interact seems to possess one flaw that, like a loose thread, causes your hypothetical future together to unravel. The tall, red-haired marketing executive with a photo of herself on roller skates loves to read novels whose covers have puffy letters that have they sell at airport newsstands. For ambiguous emphasis, she adds a punctuation smiley face. The veterinarian has 3 dogs, which seems like one too many for a single person. The accountant who loves 80s music, that sounds promising, has an odd way of spelling her otherwise common first name, and why is she sitting on the lap of the dapper fellow captioned best friend in the last photo? Too many exclamation points in a profile? Pass. Note, 2 exclamation points are too many exclamation points. References to oneself as a picky eater foretell a lot of dinners at Applebee's and Olive Garden. Mentions of a love of dancing, when the age listed is over 24, suggests a freer spirit than you might be able to wrangle in your 30s. You don't rule out anyone who wants children, a question so important the site puts it beneath everyone's age. Your ex-wife did not want kids, but days before you left Nashville, she told you maybe she did want kids, just not with you. A long silence followed. Both of you knew what she meant. Your profile lists you as a maybe on children. Maybe more than kids, you want someone to find you worthy of parenthood. Maybe you're more enamored of possibility and hypothetical futures than the terror of actually meeting these people. Maybe if you keep saying no, none of them can reject you. Ten, give up. With some of your matches, you have long phone conversations. You are interested in them. They are interested in you, or at least in the charming fellow you can be on the phone. There has to be some compatibility between people who talk on the phone for 3 hours, and yet you're not sure either of you is saying anything that matters. In the early days of getting to know your ex-wife, she said you were very good on the phone, and years later that you used it as a crutch. Why can't you crack the code that gets you past first and second dates to the stage where you meet each other's friends? It's tempting to blame the formality of dating, online or otherwise. It's stilted procedures and lofty expectations. Friends' stories of their awful dates remind you this isn't easy for anyone. Maybe all your false starts have little or nothing to do with your disability. Sometimes you wonder if another person is what you're looking for. When your 6-month membership to the dating site expires, you don't renew. There have been dates described in these sections that I'm skipping over. Hilarious, sad dates with Russian graduate students who want to tell you about their divorce. I don't find yourself talking about your divorce case. Why not? That happens to say. But the online dating did lead me to my lovely wife who's with me. And this will take us up to that section, which is where I would stop it. Taking the questions if anybody has. But progress is made along the way in incremental amounts. And so 13, reactivate your online dating accounts like you just don't care. For your second attempt at online dating, you select the 1 month at a time plan. The thrills that once accompanied emails from eHarmony are long gone. You are a gambler out for revenge against the casino that took his life savings. In short order, you reached open communication with two matches, a PhD student in English named Lori and a graphic designer named Lori. Open communication, it's a feat, not to roll your eyes at that deceptive label. Both Lori and Lori seem attractive, both like to read, both have a cat, which feels important. Although you don't have a cat, you had two as a child. In your profile, trying to describe the ineffable sweetness or empathy you would most like to find in a partner, you said you were looking for someone who would stop to pet a cat. Lori and Lori, the latter was the first to send you a message in open communication. What now reads the entirety of your email. Thank you for coming out. And thrilled to field any questions on absolutely anything you might have, but I will not see your hands go up, so you have to be good, kind citizens and not step on each other's confidence. But feel free to shout them out if you have any questions, or Renee can play teacher.
So what's your process to write? Are you reciting to yourself sometimes? Are you using a computer? How do you?
Good question. I started writing short stories my senior year of high school, which was the year I was adapting to vision loss, and I had this microcassette recorder that was ostensibly purchased to record teachers' lectures in class. I quickly realized I barely wanted to hear the teacher's lecture the first time, let alone a reprise. And so this was the time, and I have a whole chapter about audiobooks, books on Tate, that made me a reader for the first time, which, ironic, because at the time I was like, is this really reading? And I've become an advocate of alternative forms of reading and audiobooks, and one of the things that books on Tate from the National Library Service for the Blind gave me was a love of reading and a desire to start writing. I think it was in ways an opportunity to push against the walls that still seem to be closing in on me as my vision continued to deteriorate. So I dictated my stories. I did not have the JAWS technology that I spoke about in that one passage until 2000. And so 1993 was the start of my senior year of high school. So I went 7 years where all my writing happened. Creative writing, non-creative writing happened on microcassettes. And I continued to do that for about a year or two. But once I had the ability to read the screen of my computer, I started quickly writing everything on the computer. Some people write longhand now as a way to slow down. I think for a little while, that was this purest impulse that I had. Like, I gotta stay to the microcassettes. The technology is gonna corrupt me. But editing on a microcassette, you're like, well, I need a 7-second sentence here. So the timing made it a little awkward. I just started moving eventually around 2002. Every single thing I did onto the computer and the screen reader. So my answer to that is probably a little bit longer than most, so it's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions about me?
How was keeping up with the software for classes and reading and writing?
Say that a little bit louder.
The software, what was it like to have to keep up with the software as more develops?
In terms of keeping up with developing technologies?
Yeah.
Yeah. JAWS in particular has updates every year and then patches that come out. It's like a lot of, probably like every software. And it is not cheap. When I got my first JAWS, I had financial assistance because I was still a student and had no income other than those Social Security checks, which do not go far when you're paying rent. And the JAWS updates would cost anywhere from $200 to $250 a year. And so I would just, ride it on empty as long as I could. There was no way I was going to refill that tank every year. And only in the last year, perhaps inspired by the pandemic, they've gone with a subscription, like Microsoft, which is its own racket. Some people use VoiceOver for the Macintosh. Mac, I'm old. Macintosh is what we used to call it. And that comes with, and Microsoft has a narrator software, which is much more primitive, but in a pinch. But that stuff did not used to come standard on desktop computers. So I am a little fearful of my mind overloading as I'm trying over dinner today. Like, what was the author of that one book? I write about books for a living, and I read books for a living. And I can't remember a book I wrote a review of 6 months ago. So I certainly am feeling middle-aged cautious about embracing new technology. But I am on the iPhone, smartphone now, despite my massive reluctance. Sorry, for many years I refused to do that. Not because it wasn't accessible, because it was one more thing I had to learn. And I like to keep things as simple as possible. So it's a great question for technology or about.
Not a question on technology. So
Yeah.
I was here the first time when you were. We never
Awesome.
met. But I was an undergrad during the time that you referenced being in school. And I remember thinking my college experience is so different than yours. And it never would have occurred to me as a student what it would be like to be you, or that you even existed. You know, and that's very eye-opening as I sit here and listen to your story of us being on the same campus at the same
Yeah.
time and things I never thought of. So when you write this book and you reference the B word, and
Yeah.
I was thinking of a different B word, for referencing, right? Have you accepted that word as part of who you are? And is there any advice you would give to people in college or studying now on how to accept their own disabilities?
That's the $100,000 question. Thank you for that. Yeah. And you probably wouldn't see somebody like me who was dealing with denial as part of his own personal narrative, because I strive to stay hidden in plain sight. And taking myself out of situations as an undergrad on a small campus, that was, as much as the director of disability services that I read about, it was also being intimidated when I got here. And I don't think I can find my way around. My friends from my high school who are going to be my roommates, they're going to live in the towers on the other side of campus. And apparently blind students, they want us to stay on the downtown campus, and nobody wanted to live there in my high school because there's really old dorms, and everybody was applying early for housing. It's like, if I don't know anybody, how am I going to blend in? And that was my constant goal, was just blending in and not trying to be the best version of myself, but trying to be the best version of my old self. And I would, it's tough to try and talk, because every disability, even blindness, is so specific to the individual. There's so many types of blindness, so many different. I have blurry peripheral vision that allows me to sort of, mobility is a little bit better than some. I can't read for a lick, I can't see anything in front of me, so acuity is atrocious. But I've come to use the word blind in part out of self-acceptance and in part out of convenience. And also because I've met people who use that term much more universally, and it feels liberating. And to the other part of your question, what would I say to folks who are maybe 16, a wounded young man that I was, is that this is not your identity in terms of your desires and your hopes and your dreams. This is a feature of your physicality. And the things that you might miss most when you're 16 are not things that you're going to even remember when you're 40, 40, 55, 50. And so we're constantly changing as bodies, as minds, but we're also constantly changing in terms of our self-perception and what we want. These are amazing questions. Thank you, guys.
I'm an occupational therapist.
Bless you.
Thank you. But there's many of us here. We're so interested in your story. And we really understand how we can help people by listening carefully to their story. And so my question for you is, what are some of the ways that you participate in occupations that are most important and meaningful for you right now, given some of the experiences that you've had?
Yeah. Learning to be your own advocate, and also learning that no one's going to advocate for you if you don't advocate for yourself. And we were having this discussion earlier with the Office of Accessibility Resources, and you get spoiled as a student because, and I had the huge advantage. I mean, if you want to read a book about living with blindness and trying to pass for sighted in horrible situations that put your life and relationships in peril, like mine did, from a different generation, well before the Americans with Disabilities Act that I benefited from. Stephen Kuasisto's Planet of the Blind is a book I look up to for that. But he, like me, experienced huge differences in how you're treated as a student, where the apparatus is much different in the ADA than the article that offers accommodations to employees. Employees have to pay money for your accommodations, and it can become, even in an academic institution, becomes very fraught in trying to say what, because that word reasonable accommodations, what is reasonable to an employee is often different from what is reasonable to your employer, and I would say fight. And it is, I for years, when I was in such denial, I did not even want to broach that. I didn't want to be known, even when some colleagues were aware of what I needed. I refused, because when you were a low man on the totem pole in an adjunct position, you're like, well, they only gave me 2 classes last semester. How many are they going to give me if I ask for $1,000 software? So I just would buy that stuff myself or find other ways to get around it. And so that's where it becomes really difficult, making your way in the world that is already not built for you when money enters the equation, and that bottom line for employers who are either incapable or unsympathetic, in worst case scenarios, both. Was that exactly what you were asking?
Yeah, and what, I guess just as a follow-up question, are there any pieces of technology or apps that you found to be really, like, this is a really good one, this is one that you use a lot?
The iPhone is something that I have not fully had a chance to use because I have not traveled in the last, 45 years via plane, but I've been advised as I have finally a trip coming up. Yay, airplane travel with the pandemic. Exciting, not really, but I get a chance to try out these apps that a couple of blind friends have told me about, finding a way around an airport, and there are so many apps. Another one that once I am going to be back in the classroom, I'm back in the classroom now, but I have not had this for the classes I'm teaching this semester. But where we've moved to such a paperless society, and I'm blessed that I can read everything on my computer, but in the eras of handouts, or the eras where there's documents you need to read, where I used to have to, in college, pass them off to a human reader and wait a day or two for that to be translated to a cassette. Now, what you can do with your smartphone, and it's something from the National Federation of the Blind, there's probably multiple versions of this, but it will direct you to take a picture, and it will tell you when the picture is lined up over the document, and then it reads it to you. You can do that in a store with a price tag. You can do that in a store with a menu. So many of these situations, obviously, it's weird because I've been asked this question on occasion in a couple of podcasts, like, do you wish these technologies had been around? I didn't go over the fact that I got most of my groceries for the majority of my time in Morgantown from the Dairy Mart over on Whitley Street, across the street from that apartment building. And there's a lot less food in what's now a little general store. And I was there yesterday, like, wow, they used to have like 12 different kinds of cereals, and now it's just soda and beer, soda and beer. And at the same time, in 2021, We have grocery delivery. We have all these options. And that comes with financial barriers for most of us too. But I think if I had had these technologies, I probably would have continued to use them as a way to obscure, and I might still be. So they're wonderful, but they're not, also not a substitute for self-acceptance, which was my biggest barrier. And hopefully that's not everybody's barrier, but there are many wonderful tools that are out there for those who will acknowledge that they're useful. Thank you all for all these questions, for coming out in this weird time in which we still find ourselves. One last question? 10 last questions. You guys have been extremely patient. I probably read for longer than I should.
I have a question.
Thank you.
So I'm an occupational therapy student, and I'm very interested in like advocacy. So I know that like as far as the Center for Disabilities and accommodations, like, that stuff's improved a lot. I'm sure since you were here. But have you ever taken part in any advocacy for that, or like do you?
At my university, the faculty intermingling with the opposite, we don't even say it's weird. It's almost like we're afraid of the word disability in our culture. I think we're phobic of that word, as even in COVID, we're substituting phrases like underlying conditions, which is not quite the same thing. Maybe there's some overlap. And so they've changed disability to the opposite of something resources. And it's for veterans, it's for students with disabilities. And so it's become convoluted. So to me, the most important advocacy I can do on a college campus is give my students what they need, regardless of what the disability office tells them they're entitled to, because, and I would encourage folks to ignore regulations. I don't know that there's a penalty or a punishment for just giving students what they need in the year 2021, especially, but beyond. It's like, well, the Office of Disability Services says you can get 50% more test time. I'm not just taking all the time we need to finish this exam if this is genuinely who you are. But that's probably not quite the gist of your question and the spirit of your question that I'm really happy with in terms of cultural advocacy, right? For those with disabilities of many different kinds. Any follow-ups? I feel like I might or might not have, and I think I only heard about 80% of your question.
Oh no, that was fine. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
JT, I'm going to change the questions a little bit. There's so much pop culture in your book,
Okay.
right? Tons. We got Rain Man. We've got Prince. We've got movies of all stripes from the 80s. What is it about pop culture that speaks to you as a person and a writer? And
Yeah.
how do you think it's functioning in there?
Two ways. One, I gotta say, I grew up in outside city limits in Charleston. And so even though we were right next to the glorious, once glorious, now tragic Charleston Town Center, like all our malls, they're kind of dying. But that was, for my 80s childhood and 90s, the window to the outside world. You know, living in West Virginia, you don't get franchise restaurants, but like 3 years after the rest of the world gets them. And then by the time you're old enough to realize that, you're like, oh, that's not really anything I needed anyway. And so the window to the outside world was pop culture and going to Kroger and looking at Entertainment Weekly or People Magazine and watching all these shows that provided access to far off lands. But then when the vision loss came, it took on a different power. It was a different window. It was a different type of access. For better and worse, it became a little bit of a crutch on which I could lean to obscure and change subjects and steer conversations away from myself. It's not to say there's not a purity to my love of Prince and David Bowie and the Golden Girls and all points in between. They provided comfort, and I think all art allows us maybe to articulate to ourselves the emotions that we're not capable of articulating, either to ourselves or to other people. So that was the good part of it, but the bad part of it, I'm sure, was it allowed me to talk about something other than me. Like, hey, let's talk about the Oscars. Let's talk about this artist. Let's listen to this song and then not speak about anything true about ourselves. So it was definitely a way to be direct.
I'm wondering if you thought about the audience for this memoir as you were in the process of writing it, because as I was reading it, I found it very compelling as someone who doesn't have any experience with disabilities, but I can only imagine that it would be just as, if not more compelling for those who might have those experiences. And I'm wondering if you were thinking about that as you were compiling this and drafting it.
Great question about it occurs to me if I were the real professor doing the hybrid thing for the last year and a half, I would have repeated all these questions so that people watching on Zoom. Thank you for watching on Zoom. I'm sorry if you had to just get my answers to not these great questions. Question about, was I thinking about the audience while writing this book? And my first inclination of, or my first inkling of who was the audience was, is anybody going to care? I think every memoirist, unless you're that Scandinavian guy, doesn't seem overly preoccupied with anybody caring. We all struggle with that. Is my life a story that is going to matter to other people? That was the one that I just had to swallow and forge forward and hope that I was able to find enough of a narrative, because well before I started writing it, I didn't, in my years of denial, I didn't have a narrative arc because I didn't have an ending to the book. There was no self-acceptance, so there was nothing to write about narratively. And in terms of who might read this, I think whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, you have to have that bold self-belief that if you get specific enough, then you will achieve some kind of universal appeal, or as universal as any book in this year is going to achieve, or at least whatever the audience for this book is ideally going to be. For example, the long chapter from which I read, and I skipped around, so I'm sure you didn't get a full sense of that chapter in Morgantown. I was while writing it, I was really riveted to the voice that I was creating in that Morgantown chapter. But if I stopped and looked down, as they say, I was like, I'm just kind of by myself all the time. I'm not sure there's a there. And the weirdest, most gratifying thing, as friends give me reactions and then some strangers give me reactions to the book, is I've had 3 different people say that was their favorite chapter because it reminded them of a time in their life when they felt most isolated, or at least capable of communicating who they were to friends or family. And so I think the best we can hope for is a universality of emotion, but the only way to do that is to tell the specifics of our own story. But that is easier said than done.
JT, I have one that you're famous now because they're coming in from Zoom. So the question is, what are you working on now? Another book, and will it be more like Academy Gothic or like Blind Man's Bluff?
Probably more like Blind Man's Bluff, although it is a novel that I finished. It's a novel set in the malls of the 1980s and 90s. And there is disability as a feature of one character, but it's not the center of the book. And it takes place in my hometown of Charleston at the town center in its heyday of the mid-80s. And it features lots of child stars, some real and some fictional. And it is probably closer to Blind Man's Bluff, even if the subject matter is very far. And one of the things that I've found through writing the memoir is that I've loosened up all these ways to tap into memory and emotion that don't even have anything to do with blindness, but using parts of my autobiography as I'm building characters from the inside out. And it feels like the best thing I've written. Other than this book, I guess, maybe the best novel that I've written in ways that I know I can credit the deep truth that I had access for the memoir. Wow, Zoom questions. I know you made the big time. That was probably Fred watching. It's not my mom, because she says she's always too terrified to ask questions during Zoom. Been doing so many of these events, I had to do it on my mom's birthday, so at least I had to wish her happy birthday from Zoom. Sort of tell the story as we're dinner, but they were revealing tidbit that my mom was concerned about me revealing in chapter 3. Any other questions? This has been wonderful. This has been, thank you so much for listening and for engaging and for having me up here in a place I am with my spirit at least 35 times during basketball season. And if you have any other questions, I'm glad to field them one-on-one. I will put my mask back on for that purpose, and happy to sign any books, which I think are here somewhere. Thank you all for coming.